big reasons for being here today was this chap, Sir Ken Robinson. A lot of you said you've seen that presentation. Amazing talk, fantastic talk on the RSA website. We had the RSA here yesterday, Director of Education, talking about how they believe that creativity not can solve the world's ills, but it can certainly make the world a better place, connecting people. They talked about the creativity gap, the gap between aspiration and what we're actually doing and what they can do to actually fill that gap. Ken Robinson's TED Talk, they say estimated viewings of 300 million. A lot of people have seen that. I did a talk at the Royal Society of Arts saying, well, how many people have seen the talk and how many people have done something? Saying, let's do something. Let's find a framework that we can all get involved with and do something. After that talk, people are very critical of Ken Robinson, Sir Ken. They say, well, hang on, you've done the TED Talk. What do we do? What's the solution? He said, well, for goodness sake, give me a break. I was only on an 18-minute talk. I can't solve the world in 18 minutes. Which is a nice answer, but people do want something. He then published a book called The Element, which is helping you find something inside you that you might want to do. And Ken Robinson's come up with something now. He's come up with this book called Creative Schools, and I'd actually quite like to just read a little bit out of it. They sent me a copy the other week. The opening page here, introduction, 1 minute to midnight. Are you concerned about education? I am. One of my deepest concerns is that while education systems around the world are being reformed, many of these reforms are being driven by political and commercial interests that misunderstand how real people learn and how great schools actually work. As a result, they're damaging the prospects of countless young people. Sooner or later, for better or worse, they will affect you or someone you know. It's important to understand what these reforms are about. If you agree they're going in the wrong direction, I hope you all become part of the movement to a more holistic approach that nurtures the diverse talents of all our children. If you don't read any more of that book, just read that introduction. And that book is a framework. I commend that book to you. It's a fantastic book from Sir Ken Robinson. We had Guy Claxton here yesterday, who's a fantastic educationist. Up until now, Ken Robinson's been talking the talk. Guy Claxton, with Building Learning Power, has been walking the walk and showing people a blueprint for making this sort of change in their children's schools. And we're going to be hearing from that talk later on today. This is a little snippet of Sir Ken's talk.
So I want to talk about education, and I want to talk about creativity. My contention is that creativity now is as important in education as literacy, and we should treat it with the same status.
Would anybody agree with that? Yes. Creativity is now as important as literacy. That's not to say we shouldn't be teaching children to read, write and do the basics. That's absolutely critical. We're going to hear from Jane Davis and her team later, City of Readers, the reader in Liverpool here. Inspiring children to read. The feedback I got yesterday from the workshops we ran in the STEAMco day yesterday, that was Michelle's talk for the reader, working with children, reading them stories, inspiring those children, was one of the strongest sessions we had yesterday. And it shows how you can connect children through literacy and inspire them with creativity. I was delighted to get back off holiday to get Ken's book. And basically he filmed a talk for us, 30-minute talk and some questions and answers. What does Liverpool mean to you? What do you remember of the city, growing up in the city?
Well, I grew up in Liverpool. I was born there in 1950, which seems like a rather long time ago now. And to me, it was always a vibrant community. I mean, then it was suffering a lot after the war, a lot of unemployment and rationing when we grew up as kids. But as I grew up and became more independent in my teens and 20s, there was always a fantastic sense of community. I mean, on the one hand, people from Liverpool are always, they always identify very strongly with the city, no matter where they're from. I mean, I meet people from all over the world and you can immediately tell somebody's from Liverpool. It's not just the accent, by the way, of which there are many different versions, but there's a sense of pride in the city, a sense of affection for it. You just feel it. It's palpable to be a Scouser. You get it. But also there was just a tremendous amount of creative activity. I mean, I should say as well, I grew up right next to Everton's football ground on Speller Lane. And there was a strong sense of community feel there in those streets. And I'm from a big family. I've got 5 brothers and a sister, and my mum was one of 7 kids. My dad was one of 5. So we had lots of cousins. So there was always a big personal sense of community, as well as being a feeling that you were part of the kind of enveloping culture of the city itself, wherever you happen to end up.
So my next question, I think, would be, who was your inspiration? How did you get inspired with creativity in the city?
Well, Liverpool was always full of music and poetry and theatre. I used to go to the Everyman when I was at school, and there were fantastic productions on there, really for me, transformative. I used to go to the Philharmonic. We were taken along there by the school. I went to the collegiate school originally, and then my dad had an industrial accident, and we had to get a bigger house after we got something. Got a very small financial settlement actually for it. It's risible by today's standards, but it was enough for us to move out, and we bought a sort of larger place, a bungalow out in Widnes. But I used to come back into the city a lot, and this was the time of the Beatles. It's hard to exaggerate the impact the Beatles had on the pride of the city and on the sheer pleasure of being from there. And every record they brought out was an event. There were the Mersey poets, Roger McGough and Brian Patton and Adrian Henry and all the rest were active. And then just all the energy surrounding the two great football clubs in the city. So, my brothers were entertainers too. My brother Ian was in a band and always has been in bands. He's still in bands actually. Has his own recording studio out in Widnes, the waterfront. And my elder brother Keith and with our cousin Billy, they were in cabaret and entertainment. They had a comedy act. So, the music, the poetry, the comedians. Ken Dodd was such an iconic figure for all of us. It just always felt that this was a really creative place, and I think it was partly that inspired me in the sense of people's creative potential.
I never thought I'd be standing here doing a talk with Ken Dodd mentioned by somebody who's done the world's biggest TED Talk.
Something I say to all parents is that you have to treat your kids individually. There's always a great temptation to want for your own kids, in a way, the things you would like for yourself. But, I'll make you a bet, if there are parents in the audience here today, if you've got 2 kids or more, I'll make you a bet, and I'm confident I'll win it. My bet is that they're completely different from each other. They are, aren't they? You'd never confuse your own children, like, no, which one are you, remind me. You naturally see the differences, the individuality of your own kids. And we have 2. Our son James is 30 now, our daughter Kate is 25, and they're very alike in some respects. They're both like me and my wife Terry, who's also from Liverpool, by the way, from West Derby. And she often said, by the way, I'm from Walton, she's from West Derby. She feels she married beneath her, frankly, and I did upgrade myself. But she's, we've been together for 40 years, and she and I have been very aligned over our kids. They're very different, they have very different talents. So as we've moved around and lived in different parts of Britain and now in America, we were always prepared to put them into different schools if they needed to be in different schools. What worked for one didn't work for the other. And we haven't tried to push them both along the same path. James is a really good actor. Kate was always a dancer. She's very into design. James is much more into writing and analysis and things of that sort. He's a great comic actor. Kate's wonderful with children and writes wonderful stories for them too. So we've tried to respect their individuality and to encourage their emergent interests and passions as we perceive them and as they did.
That's great. It's good to hear about your family life. Thanks for sending me a copy of the book. Could you tell us a little bit about the book?
I can. A lot of people know my work these days through the TED Talks. I gave a talk at TED in 2006, which has been seen online now, about, I think it's 32 million times. It also gets seen by groups of people like this one tonight. I don't say you're seeing the talk tonight, but larger groups like this. And so I think you can probably multiply the online viewing figure by maybe 10 to get the number of people who've seen it, so that maybe it's been seen by 300 to 400 million people. So people know me through that, but I've been at this a long time. And actually I was in a university in the Midwest last year speaking to the students, and before this event, which was in the basketball stadium, which is one of the rare occasions in which I go into a basketball stadium, I go in there to give talks, I had lunch with the faculty, and one of them said to me, "You've been at this a long time now, haven't you?" I said, "What's that?" And they said, trying to change education. And this guy said, "What is it now, 7 years?" I said, "How do you mean 7 years?" He said, "Since that TED Talk." I said, "Yes, but I was alive before that. This was just a moment." And I'm saying it because I've been involved in educational work and trying to transform education all my professional life. That's pushing on now for 40 years. So I've directed all kinds of practical projects, worked with schools, school districts and associations in the UK and further afield. And I know that the things I'm arguing for work. Sometimes people say to me, or they ask me about my theories, and I say, these aren't theories. This is what works. If you respect the individuality of your children, if you give them opportunities to develop their natural talents, if you engage their curiosity, that's how you get them to grow and to love learning. And if you treat them as automatons, or you treat them as if they've all come out the same mould, that's how you disaffect them. That's not a theory, it's what happens. So a lot of people have seen the talks I've given, and they naturally say, okay, we get the problem, but you don't tell us, or they have sometimes said to me, you don't tell us what to do. And I say, well, one response is, well, give me a break. It's an 18-minute talk. There's a lot to say about practically what has to happen in education to bring about the sorts of changes that many of us think are important. That's what this book's about. It's arguing for radical change, but also showing how it happens, and not just how it could happen, but how it is happening. There are schools all over the country, schools all around the world, which are doing brilliant work, but they do it almost in spite of the dominant culture of education, political culture, not because of it. So it's a book that sets out to argue for a different approach to education, and also to set out how it looks and how other schools can make this happen.
And there's some good advice there. Times are tight. Parents get bombarded, the latest toys, the latest gadgets, the latest robot sets, this, that and the other apps, computers. What would you suggest a family do when times are tight like this?
I would certainly spend your money on buying this book. Really, I think it's probably the best investment you can make. No, seriously, I think that what I'm arguing for isn't necessarily expensive. It's not the case that we can't change education, for example, without spending a ton more money. Actually, I'll come back to the family thing in a minute, but we spend a huge amount of money on education, but a lot of it's misspent. I think it's misdirected. And I've always argued this, that schools can transform themselves without huge additional outlays of money. It's about using the resource that you have got. I think the same thing applies to families. Families, and I mean, we are living in very tough times for all sorts of people and for all kinds of reasons. Some of the changes I'm arguing for don't really cost a lot of money. It's about giving your kids opportunities to discover their interests and their talents. And they may lie in very many and diverse areas. So it's about paying attention to them. But it is also, if you can, it's about creating opportunities. See, the new social media, the new digital technologies offer tremendous resources and tremendous possibilities. And if you're in a position, obviously, to invest in some of these technologies, you'll find that there are wonderful tools, particularly for music and for science, for just satisfying and developing a curiosity. These resources online are fantastic now. There are wonderful visual arts programs on even basic laptops these days. So part of it is putting tools in the hands of people. And if you don't need tools, I mean, to dance you don't need some great elaborate piece of equipment. To do theatre you don't need some elaborate setup. It's about identifying the particular interests that your kids have got and creating opportunities, if they don't know what they are, to discover them. I mean, when I was growing up, it's a classic thing. People spent more time playing with the cardboard box often at Christmas than what it came in. Finding your talents is about developing your self-knowledge, looking inside yourself, understanding what your talents are and your interests might be. And that's about opportunity and time and encouragement as much as it is about actual money. So I don't think that we should think that unless there's some extensive discretionary budget, that the things I'm talking about simply aren't available. It's just not true.
That's a great example there, that not necessarily being about money and what you do with your money, but how you spend it and implying creativity. We put the shout out to the community here in Liverpool for some questions, and one of the best questions really described, if you like, the elephant in the room. One of the biggest issues, and that came from Nigel Ward, who I know you did a TEDx talk in Liverpool with last year, which is a fantastic, another view of your world, and also a very interesting backstory on what Nigel Ward is doing here with the schools. Nigel's question was, what do you think of the STEM versus STEAM debate?
Nothing I have to say about education is a criticism of the importance of teaching science, technology, engineering and math. On the contrary, I chaired a national strategy group in the late 90s at the request of the then government, on how to develop a creative strategy for schools, how to promote creativity systematically in the school system. It was called, the report we produced was called All Our Futures, Creativity, Culture and Education. And the group I got together, there were artists in the group, but there were scientists, there were technologists, there were economists, there were business leaders, as well as dancers and designers and comedians and poets. See, creativity is about everything. It's not a subject in itself. It's a way of doing things. It's about how you apply your imagination. So I don't want to promote a dichotomy between the so-called STEM disciplines, science, technology, engineering and math, and the rest of the curriculum, but I do want to promote the rest of the curriculum. The rest of the curriculum includes, the necessary and essential curriculum includes the arts, music, dance, theatre, poetry, visual arts, and the rest. It includes the humanities, the study of human cultures. It includes physical education, crucially. There are all kinds of problems in schools now which are, I think, the result of having cut down on the time that kids can get up and move around and be physically active. So a broad curriculum has to encourage not just a knowledge of the outer world, but the ability to engage with your inner world of feelings and intuitions and spirituality. We need to be educating the whole child. So I absolutely commend every attempt to broaden the curriculum. And I think STEAM is a good, this particular organisation, STEAM Co, that put together this event, is doing fantastic work. It's putting the A back in, which is for the arts. I think that's really important. It's interesting to me, though, that it's a tactic that's necessary in the context of the STEM disciplines being given such a priority. But if we're to get really balanced, we have to have the other things like the humanities and physical education. So I don't know what acronym you end up with then. It's like STUMP, isn't it? I don't know. So it's a good acronym. But it's an acronym in the interests of a broader conception of education, which isn't exclusive of the STEM disciplines, but inclusive of all the talents that our children really have.
STEAM Co is about powering communities. It's about bringing artists, business people, parents, teachers together to help primary school parents. What do you think our biggest challenge is going to be?
Well, education is and should probably be seen as a partnership between all those different agencies. One of the problems I encounter a lot is that there are all sorts of misconceptions about, for example, the nature of creativity. There are misconceptions about the purposes of education. Education is one of those areas on which people often disagree quite fundamentally. There was a philosopher called Walter Bryce Galley who said that education is an example of what he called an essentially contested concept. What he meant is this: there are some words, like ideas like justice and democracy, equality and opportunity and freedom, over which people disagree quite fundamentally. I'm living in America now, and there's a consistent debate about gun ownership. And some people say it's all about that owning a gun is an example of the enshrined belief in the Constitution of personal freedom. Well, it's not freedom for somebody who gets shot randomly because you live in a culture where there are more guns than people. So freedom is one of those ideas that over which people seem to agree until they start to think about it closely and they find they disagree about the actual terms of it. Education is like that. You can't really promote education fully and collaboratively without agreeing what it's all for. So one of the things I set out to do in Creative Schools is to be as clear as I can be about what I think education is for, and I encourage anyone involved in the field. You don't have to accept my definition, but you do have to at least have a clear vision of why you think education matters and what you're trying to achieve through it. So there are misconceptions about that. There are misconceptions about creativity. People think creativity is just about the arts. Well, the arts are really important. I've spent my life campaigning for them, but it's not just the arts. The arts are part of the creative program that we need to see. There are misconceptions about the nature of assessment. There are misconceptions about what should be in the curriculum. So I think one of the big obstacles is the inherent disagreements that people sometimes have about what we're really trying to get done, even though they seem to agree. The other is that there are funding problems. There are development problems. We did try to set a lot of these out, by the way, originally in All Our Futures, and I have chapters in creative schools which go into all these things in quite a bit more detail now in a contemporary way. I look at teaching, I look at assessment, partnership between parents and schools, the roles of business and so on. But clarity of purpose and then developing forms of collaboration which have mutual benefits, I think that's really the key to all of this.
So that's interesting. Collaboration, business, some interesting perspectives there. So yesterday we had a keynote talk from Professor Guy Claxton. I know you're not in the business of plugging other people's books, but could you tell us what you think of the work they're doing with Education Ruby?
Well, Guy Claxton, I've known for a long time now, actually. We go, I think, right back to the early 70s, before we were distinguished, I have to say. We were hanging out, getting drunk in London at the time. I was a postgraduate student. But Guy's done great work in what he has called learning power. And the heart of his argument is that education, at least as I see it, is that education has to enhance and cultivate and promote the natural capacities that children have to learn. So it's very important to recognise this. It's something I argue for in creative schools, that children love to learn. When we're born, we have tremendous capacities to learn. I mean, take language. Kids learn to speak in the first 18 months or so of their lives. And you don't teach them. You couldn't teach your child to speak. You wouldn't have the time and they wouldn't have the patience. You don't reach the point where your child is 12 months old or so and you sit them down and say, but we have to talk. Or more specifically, you do, and this is how it's going to work. They learn to speak. You correct them, you encourage them, you mentor them, you guide them, but you don't teach them formally in the sense of instructing them how language works. That comes later on when they learn to write and things of that sort. So Guy's point is that we're born with this tremendous capacity for learning, and that education succeeds best when that power is enhanced, guided, and encouraged. And a big part of Education for Ruby is that the nature of learning is often very personal to individuals. We have very personal talents and very personal interests. And that's a big part of my argument too, that there are some things we all have to learn in common, but also there are things about ourselves which are unique, and part of the role of education is to help children develop a sense of those and to give them the opportunities for them to grow into their own interests, into their own best talents. So I think it's a mission that Guy and I share, and it's one I'm very keen to throw my weight behind as well.
So you've seen schools all over the world. I just wondered, how do you think the UK system compares to other countries?
There's it's a very interesting thing, this to me, is that 20 years ago, maybe longer, 25, 30 years ago, countries weren't interested in what was happening in other countries. I mean, on the whole, people in England didn't really pay much attention to what was happening in Germany or Spain, and certainly not to what was happening in America, and vice versa. When I was at college, we had occasional lectures on something called comparative education. These were normally given by a professor who had his own esoteric interest in these issues in the Department of One. He'd come out from time to time and share his thinking. But now countries examine each other's education policies as closely as their defence strategies. What I mean is education has become both a global issue and a strategic issue. So now people are very interested in what's happening to each other. One of the ways they try to compare each other is through this International Programme of Student Assessment, or PISA, which is organised through the OECD, which produce these regular league tables of students' performance at the age of 15 in languages, maths and so on. I worry about this because it's led to a tremendous sense of standardisation and conformity in different education systems. Even in the UK, we can't really talk about the British education system anymore. It's a different system in Wales, Scotland, and in England, and in Northern Ireland. There are different priorities and different features. Overall, it worries me that in the UK, and it has done for a long time, that we are becoming more and more obsessed with testing. It concerns me greatly that Nicky Morgan, for example, said recently that if this government is re-elected, she was saying this in February, that they would introduce new tests at the age of 11. They would want to insist that all kids could do their 12 times tables by heart, that they are able to punctuate and pass sentences properly, and they should be able to read a novel. Don't get me wrong. I think kids should be able to do those things. I could do them when I was 11, and I'm very glad I could. But the sting in the tail is that she's also saying that there will be tests to make sure this does happen, and that in any school where it's not true of 100% of the kids, the principal may face dismissal. See, that's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous. It shows no understanding of how education works at all, as far as I can tell. The reason is that kids live in very different circumstances. They're all different. You can't guarantee these things with every 11-year-old in the country, no matter how much you might think it's desirable. So there is this increasing emphasis, and has been for a number of years in England, on standardised testing and very narrow targets, which I think are just simply playing to the pundits and the opinion polls and the popular press. There are systems around the world which are doing things differently. Finland famously has a much more successful education system. South Korea is moving in a similar direction, and Finland has no standardised testing to speak of. South Korea, which has had a lot of standardised testing, is backing away from that now because they want to encourage creativity, the sort of things that we're talking about. It's true in China that they are beginning to think of opting out of these international league tables because they can see it does damage to the real aspirations of their children. So it's a very mixed picture, and I think if England does want to compare itself, or Scotland or Ireland or Wales, then the first thing is to be very clear, as I said earlier, about the criteria which we should be trying to apply to our education systems and not take them for granted. PISA has turned out to be like the Eurovision Song Contest for education, and honestly, we all know what the Eurovision Song Contest has done for the quality of popular music. Not a lot.
That's a great point. I don't know if you get BBC Radio Merseyside over there at the moment, but I was lucky enough to get a spot on the Drive Time show the other night, which was fun. And the presenter just kept hammering home, yeah, but we need to test these kids. We need to hammer it home. It's good enough for China. Look how well China are doing in these league tables. And I said, it's not about the tables. Another frustration we've had is we're just a bunch of parents trying to just help and make a bit of a difference and drive some community engagement. Just wondering what your thoughts are around that kind of political thing a little bit more, because we have an election in a week or so's time, and I'm personally very disappointed, and I've tweeted on this, I've blogged on this. It has not been addressed in our election. It has not been discussed in the leaders' debates. They're obsessed with safe subjects, and I understand why, because they've got to win and then change things. But what do you say about this?
We have to face the fact that education is a political issue, by which I mean it's a matter of public policy. It's an economic issue. Some people say, well, we shouldn't mix education and the economy. That's just naive. At the most basic level, we expect education to have economic benefits. If it's true nationally, governments invest so much in education because they believe that a well-educated workforce will contribute to economic prosperity, and they're not wrong. That's absolutely true. It's true at the family level that we want our kids to go to school, partly because we expect that if they do well in education, they'll be better placed to become employed and to become economically independent. I think most parents want that for their kids. I mean, I do. I can't tell you how much I want my children to be economically independent, and as soon as possible. And education is one of the ways in which we all imagine that will happen. But in the economy, you see, the question then is, well, what sort of education do they need to become economically productive and independent now? It's not the same education the people of my generation needed in the 1950s and 1960s, but politicians behave as if it is. It's not that education shouldn't be the subject of proper political debate. The problem is that the debate about education has become politicized, by which I mean that political parties use it as a kind of punch bag. It's one of the areas in which they decide to flex their muscles and show how macho they are. They talk about tough new policies, and so typically speaking, the right wing of politics tends more towards the view that education should be all about direct instruction and learning facts and figures and so on, and getting back to traditional standards, whatever they believe they happen to have been. Some people on the left believe that education should be much more about freedom and self-expression. These aren't exclusive categories, but what happens is that people pitch stereotypes too often at each other, and the real balance that's required in education becomes lost in this political struggle. So I don't object to politicians having serious discussions about the real purpose of education, as long as they pay attention to what real people are actually like. what children are actually like and what their needs are, and what the sort of education we genuinely need to help our communities to flourish and to thrive. And it's not one based on standardisation, it's not one based on mass production, and it's not one based on these vacuous league tables.
Well, what can I say? But thank you very much, Sir Ken. If we could have a big round of applause for that. I know he's not here, but I know how. I'm very, very grateful for you, very grateful for Terry, your wife, and Jodie, your assistant, for helping make that happen and arrange that for us. It's been absolutely fantastic, and thank you so much. And for doing this for your home city, for Liverpool, and to encourage us with what we're doing with the community here in Liverpool.
Thank you very much.